The storm and the stranger, the rain hammered against the windows of Mercy General Hospital with relentless fury, each drop echoing through the corridors like tiny drumbeats of chaos. It was nearly midnight on a Tuesday in the emergency room, buzzed with the usual symphony of urgent voices, beeping monitors, and hurried footsteps. The storm had brought with it a steady stream of accidents and emergencies. Keeping every staff member on their toes, Claire Bennett wiped the sweat from her forehead as she hurried between patients, her blue scrubs already showing signs of the long shifts she had endured. At 26, she had been working as a nurse for 4 years, but tonight felt different. The exhaustion weighed heavier on her shoulders, and the mounting bills at home seemed to press against her consciousness with each passing hour. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, but she ignored it. She knew it was probably another reminder about her father's medical bills, or the overdue rent notice she had shoved into her purse that morning. Thomas Bennett, her father, had been battling diabetes complications for months, and the treatments were draining every penny Claire could earn, even with her double shifts. A commotion near the emergency entrance caught her attention. Through the glass doors, she could see paramedics wheeling in another patient, but something else drew her eye. A figure huddled against the wall outside, barely visible through the sheets of rain. The automatic doors slid open as the paramedics rushed past, and Claire caught a glimpse of the person. Clearly it was a man, probably in his early 30s, soaked to the bone and shivering uncontrollably. His clothes were tattered and dirty, hanging loosely on his thin frame. His hair was matted against his head, and he clutched a worn backpack to his chest, like it contained everything he owned in the world. "Claire, we need you in room 3, called out Dr. Patricia Woods, the attending physician who had become something of a mentor to Claire over the years. "Just a moment, Dr. Woods," Claire replied, her eyes still fixed on the man outside. Something about his posture struck her as odd. Despite his obvious distress, there was a dignity in the way he held himself, a careful composure that seemed at odds with his appearance. She grabbed a hospital blanket from a nearby cart and stepped outside. The rain immediately began soaking through her scrubs, but she pressed forward. The man looked up as she approached, and their eyes met. They were a striking shade of brown, clear and intelligent, not what she had expected. "Sir, are you hurt?" Claire asked, raising her voice over the sound of the storm. "You shouldn't be out here in this weather." The man tried to speak, but his teeth were chattering too violently. He managed to shake his head, but Claire could see he was in distress. His lips had a bluish tinge, and his breathing seemed labored. "Come inside," she insisted, wrapping the blanket around his shoulders. "Let me at least get you warm and check your vitals." He hesitated, glancing toward the bright lights of the emergency room. "I don't have insurance," he managed to say through his chattering teeth. "I can't pay for treatment." Claire's heart clenched. She had heard these words countless times, and each time they reminded her of her own financial struggles. But she had never let that stop her from helping someone in need. "Don't worry about that right now," she said firmly. "Let's just get you inside and warmed up. We'll figure out the rest later." As they walked through the automatic doors, Claire caught the disapproving look from Janet Torres, another nurse who was known for her strict adherence to hospital policies and her general disdain for what she called frequent flyers, homeless individuals who sometimes sought shelter in the emergency room. "Claire, what are you doing?" Jeanette hissed as they passed. "We're already overcrowded. Now you're bringing in someone who probably just wants a free meal and a warm place to sleep." Claire ignored her colleague's comment and guided the man to an empty examination room. She helped him sit on the edge of the bed and began taking his vital signs. His pulse was rapid and weak, and his body temperature was dangerously low. "What's your name?" she asked gently as she wrapped a blood pressure cuff around his arm. "David," he replied quietly, his voice carrying a refinement that surprised her. "David ... Harrison. Well, David, I'm Claire. I'm going to take good care of you tonight." She noticed his hands as she adjusted the cuff. They were soft, with well-manicured nails, not the rough, calloused hands she typically saw on homeless patients. A small alarm bell rang in the back of her mind, but she pushed it aside. People ended up on the streets for all sorts of reasons. As she worked, David watched her with curious intensity. There was something about his gaze that made her feel as though he was studying her, evaluating her in some way. But his eyes also held a deep sadness that tugged at her heartstrings. "Have you eaten today?" Claire asked, as she noted his blood pressure reading. It was lower than she would have liked. David shook his head. "Not since yesterday morning, I think." Without hesitation, Claire reached into her purse and pulled out a granola bar she had been saving for her own dinner break. She also grabbed a cup of water from the dispenser in the corner. "Here, eat this slowly," she instructed, placing both items in his hands. "Your blood sugar is probably low, and we need to get some food in you." David stared at the granola bar for a long moment, then looked up at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Thank you," he said, and there was something in his tone that suggested the gratitude went deeper than just appreciation for food. "Don't mention it," Claire replied, checking his temperature with a digital thermometer. "Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity." As David ate, Claire continued her examination. She discovered that he had no obvious injuries, but his overall condition suggested prolonged exposure to harsh weather and inadequate nutrition. What puzzled her most was the contradiction between his appearance and certain details that didn't quite fit. His teeth were in excellent condition, and despite the dirt and worn clothing, she caught subtle hints of expensive cologne that had somehow survived the rain. "David, how long have you been on the streets?" she asked while listening to his heart with her stethoscope. He paused mid-chew, seeming to consider his answer carefully. "A few weeks," he said finally. "I lost my job and then my apartment. Thanks. Just ... spiraled out of control." Claire nodded sympathetically. She had heard similar stories many times before, though something about his account felt incomplete. But she wasn't there to interrogate him. She was there to provide medical care. "Claire," Dr. Woods called from the doorway. "I need you to assist with the cardiac patient in room 7. "I'll be right there," Claire responded, then turned back to David. "I have to help with another patient, but I'll be back to check on you soon. Try to get some rest." As she stood to leave, David caught her wrist gently. His touch was surprisingly warm now, and once again she noticed the softness of his skin. "Why are you helping me?" he asked, his brown eyes searching her face intently. Claire was taken aback by the question. It seemed so obvious to her. "Because you needed help," she said simply. "Because that's what we do for each other as human beings." Something shifted in David's expression, a mix of surprise and what looked almost like relief. He released her wrist and leaned back against the pillow she had placed behind him. "Thank you, Claire," he said again, and she noticed that his voice was steadier now, stronger. The rest of Claire's shift passed in a blur of medical emergencies and routine procedures. True to her word, she checked on David several more times throughout the night. Each time, she found him resting quietly, though she sometimes caught him watching the bustling activity of the emergency room with keen interest. During one of her visits, she brought him a sandwich from the staff breakroom vending machine, spending her last few dollars without thinking twice about it. David accepted the food with the same profound gratitude, though she noticed he seemed more alert and stronger with each passing hour. It was nearly 6 in the morning when Claire finished her paperwork and prepared to end her shift. The storm had finally passed, leaving the city washed clean and gleaming in the early morning light. She made one final check on David before leaving. The examination room was empty. Claire stared at the neatly made bed, confusion washing over her. The hospital gown he had changed into was folded precisely on the chair, and his wet clothes were gone. There was no sign of him anywhere. She hurried to the nurse's station. "Did anyone see the homeless man from room 12 leave?" she asked. "Janet, who was just starting her day shift." "You mean your charity case?" Janet replied with a smirk. "He slipped out about an hour ago. They always do that. Take what they can get and disappear before anyone can ask questions about payment." Claire felt a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. She was glad David was feeling well enough to leave on his own, but she had hoped to at least say goodbye and maybe connect him with some social services that could help him get back on his feet. As she gathered her things to leave, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that there had been much more to David Harrison than met the eye. His refined speech, his soft hands, the way he had studied everything around him with such intelligent observation, none of it fit the typical profile of someone who had been living on the streets. But as she stepped out into the fresh morning air, Claire pushed these thoughts aside. She had more pressing concerns waiting for her at home. Her father would be awake soon, needing his morning medication. She had bills to pay with money she didn't have. Little did she know that her simple act of kindness on that stormy night had set in motion a chain of events that would change her life in ways she could never have imagined. David Harrison was indeed not who he appeared to be, and his brief encounter with the compassionate nurse had affected him more profoundly than she could possibly understand. As Claire boarded the bus for home, exhausted but satisfied that she had done her job well, David Harrison sat in the back seat of a luxury car several blocks away, still wearing the tattered clothes from the night before, but speaking into an expensive smartphone. "Yes, I want you to find out everything about her," he was saying to someone on the other end of the line. "Claire Bennett. She's a nurse at Mercy General. Want to know about her family, her financial situation, everything. I want it done discreetly." He ended the call and stared out the window at the hospital in the distance, his mind replaying every moment of his interaction with the remarkable woman who had treated him with such genuine kindness. It's 32 years of life, most of 2 years of life, most of them spent surrounded by wealth and privilege. David had become cynical about human nature. But Claire Bennett had reminded him that true compassion still existed in the world. Now he needed to decide what to do about it. The revelation and the return 3 weeks had passed since the stormy night that had changed everything for both Claire and David. Though only one of them fully understood the magnitude of that change, Claire had returned to her routine of exhausting double shifts, mounting bills, and the constant worry about her father's deteriorating health. The mysterious homeless man had become nothing more than a fleeting memory, occasionally surfacing in her thoughts when she encountered other patients. In similar circumstances, David Harrison, however, had spent every day since that night learning about the remarkable woman who had shown him such unexpected kindness. The private investigator he had hired had provided a comprehensive report that painted a picture of a young woman struggling against overwhelming odds while never losing her compassion for others. Claire Bennett, 26 years old, had been working as a registered nurse for 4 years. She lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment with her father, Thomas Bennett, a 60-year-old former construction worker who had been forced into early retirement due to complications from diabetes. The medical bills were crushing them financially. Claire worked double shifts regularly, often going without meals to ensure her father could afford his medications. Despite her own struggles, her colleagues consistently described her as the most caring and dedicated nurse on their floor. What struck David most profoundly was learning that the granola bar and sandwich Claire had given him that night had likely been purchased with some of the last money in her purse, her bank records, which his investigator had discreetly accessed. Through legal channels, showed a checking account that rarely held more than a few $100s at any given time. On this particular Wednesday evening, David sat in his penthouse office overlooking the city, staring at a cashier's check he had just had prepared. The amount was enough to cover Thomas Bennett's medical expenses for the next 2 years. He knew that simply sending anonymous money wouldn't be enough. He needed to understand if Claire's kindness had been genuine, or if she had somehow recognized who he was that night. David Harrison was the heir to Harrison Industries, a multinational corporation his grandfather had built from the ground up. At 32, he was worth over $2 billion, a fact that had attracted countless people who wanted to use him for his wealth. The death of his sister Emma the previous year in a car accident had sent him into a deep depression and made him question everything about the people in his life. That was what had led him to his unusual experiment. For months, he had been disguising himself as someone down on their luck. Most of the encounters had confirmed his worst fears about human nature. People were quick to judge, slow to help, and generally indifferent to suffering they encountered. But Claire had been different. Completely, remarkably different. His assistant, Rachel Martinez, knocked on his office door and entered with a tablet in her hands. "Mr. Harrison, I have the information you requested about Mercy General Hospital's upcoming charity auction." "Tell me about it," David said, turning away from the window. "It's their annual fundraising event, held every year to raise money for their indigent care fund. This year it's being held at the Grand Riverside Hotel downtown. Tickets are $500 each, and they typically raise about $200,000 for the hospital." David nodded thoughtfully. I want to make a donation to the auction. Something significant that will get attention. How significant are we talking about? Rachel asked, stylus poised over her tablet. $1 million. Rachel's eyebrows rose slightly, though she was accustomed to her boss's generous philanthropic gestures. For the Indigent Care Fund. Yes, but I want it presented in a specific way. I want to make a speech about the importance of healthcare workers who go above and beyond for their patients, especially those who can't pay. And I want to specifically honor one nurse who exemplifies those values. Do you want me to coordinate with the hospital about having you speak? Not yet. First, I need to test something. I want you to arrange for an envelope to be delivered to Claire Bennett, whose life she saved. Don't put my name on it, and make sure it can't be traced back to me. Rachel made notes on her tablet. And Rachel, I want you to have someone discreetly observe her reaction and what she does with the money. I need to know if my instincts about her are correct. The next evening, Claire was trudging up the stairs to her apartment after another grueling shift when she noticed the manila envelope that had been slipped under her door. Her name was written on it in neat printing, but there was no return address. Curious and slightly worried that it might be another bill or legal notice, she tore it open as soon as she was inside. What she found made her legs give out. She sank onto her small couch, staring at the cashier's check with unbelieving eyes. $50,000. The note was simple and brief. For your kindness to a stranger in need. From a patient whose life you saved, use this to help your family. Claire's hands trembled as she read the note again and again. Claire, what's wrong, honey? She looked up at her father with tears streaming down her face. Dad, I think someone just answered our prayers. She showed him the check and the note. Thomas Bennett, a man who had worked with his hands his entire life and understood the value of hard work, stared at the check in amazement. I need to call the bank, Claire said, reaching for her phone with shaking hands. The automated system confirmed what she could hardly believe. The check was legitimate. Over the next few days, David's investigator reported back on Claire's actions. She had not immediately cashed the check. Instead, she had spent 2 days trying to figure out who might have sent it. She had called the hospital's administration, thinking perhaps it was some kind of employee recognition program she hadn't heard about. She had even driven to the bank to speak with a manager in person, wanting to make absolutely certain the money was legitimate and that accepting it wouldn't get her into any kind of trouble. When she finally did cash the check, the first thing she did was pay off all of her father's outstanding medical bills. She scheduled him appointments with specialists they hadn't been able to afford. She bought a month's worth of groceries and filled their empty refrigerator for the first time in months. But what impressed David most was what she did next. She took $5,000 from the windfall and donated it to Mercy General's Indigent Care Fund, specifically requesting that it be used to help homeless patients who came to the emergency room. The investigator also reported that Claire had told only her father and one close friend about the money. I hadn't posted about it on social media, hadn't gone on any spending sprees, and had continued working her regular shifts as if nothing had changed. David realized that his instincts had been absolutely correct. Claire Bennett was exactly who she appeared to be, a woman of extraordinary compassion and integrity. 2 weeks later, Claire received an elegant invitation in the mail. She had been selected to receive special recognition at Mercy General's annual charity auction for her outstanding dedication to patient care. The invitation indicated that her ticket was being provided by an anonymous donor, and she was encouraged to bring a guest. Claire stared at the invitation in confusion. She had never been singled out for any kind of recognition before, and she certainly didn't understand why she would be honored at such an upscale event. The charity auction was typically attended by wealthy donors and hospital board members, not floor nurses like herself. But the mysterious gift of $50,000 had taught her that sometimes unexpected good things happened for no apparent reason. Maybe this was just another stroke of good fortune. On the night of the auction, Claire wore the only dress she owned that was appropriate for such an event. A simple black dress she had bought for her nursing school graduation 4 years earlier. She had convinced her friend Megan, another nurse from the hospital, to accompany her. The Grand Riverside Hotel was unlike anything Claire had experienced before. Crystal chandeliers hung from ornate ceilings, and elegantly dressed guests moved through the lobby with champagne glasses in their hands. The auction itself was held in the hotel's grand ballroom. Claire and Megan found their assigned seats near the front, which surprised Claire since she had assumed they would be relegated to the back of the room. As the evening progressed, various items were auctioned off to raise money for the hospital. Vacation packages, artwork, jewelry, and experiences donated by local businesses. Claire watched in amazement as people casually bid thousands of dollars on items. Then the auctioneer announced a special presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special guest with us tonight. He's here to make a significant donation to our indigent care fund. But more importantly, he wants to share a story about the kind of healthcare worker who makes our hospital truly special. Claire watched as a man in an impeccably tailored tuxedo walked onto the stage. He was tall and confident, with dark hair and warm brown eyes. Something about him seemed familiar, but she couldn't place where she might have seen him before. "My name is David Harrison," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's sound system. "Some of you may know me as the CEO of Harrison Industries, but I'm not here tonight to talk about business. I'm here to talk about compassion." Claire's breath caught in her throat. David Harrison, that name, ... those eyes. Yeah, could it possibly be? "A few weeks ago, I conducted an experiment," David continued. "I disguised myself as a homeless man and visited various places around the city to see how people would treat me when they thought I had nothing to offer them. Most of the encounters confirmed my worst fears about human nature, but one encounter restored my faith in humanity." The room had fallen completely silent. Claire felt Megan grip her arm as recognition dawned on both of them simultaneously. "On a stormy night, I went to the emergency room at Mercy General, pretending to be in distress. I was treated by a nurse who showed me kindness that went far beyond professional duty. She used her own money to buy me food. She gave me her time and attention when she was already exhausted from working a double shift. She treated me with dignity when others saw only a burden." David's eyes found Claire in the audience, and their gazes locked across the crowded room. "That nurse reminded me that true compassion exists in this world, and that some people will help others simply because it's the right thing to do. Tonight, I want to honor Nurse Claire Bennett, who exemplifies everything that's good about healthcare and about humanity itself." The spotlight found Claire, and she felt hundreds of pairs of eyes turning toward her. Her heart pounded as applause filled the ballroom, but all she could focus on was David's face as he continued speaking. "Claire, would you please join me on stage?" On trembling legs, Claire made her way to the stage, hardly believing what was happening. When she reached David, he took her hand gently, just as she had taken his that stormy night weeks ago. "I also want to announce that Harrison Industries is making a donation of $1 million to Mercy General's Indigent Care Fund to ensure that people like the man I pretended to be that night will always receive the care they deserve." The applause was thunderous, but Claire barely heard it. She was staring into the brown eyes of the man she had helped, seeing him clearly for the first time without the disguise of torn clothes and desperation. "It was you," she whispered, her voice lost in the noise of the crowd. David leaned closer so she could hear him. "Thank you, Claire Bennett, for reminding me that kindness still exists in this world. And thank you for showing me what true compassion looks like." As the audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation, Claire realized that her simple act of kindness on that stormy night had not only changed David's life, it was about to change her own in ways she was only beginning to understand.